Hi, Dr. May here. We're on video number 2 of our COVID-19 series, and today we're going to talk about how the virus works. So upon exposure, what happens to create this infection? What are some of the typical symptoms that are associated with it and why? And then what are some potential complications and how those would come about? So we'll start up in the top left-hand corner here with Mr. Pac-Man. He's going to get infected with COVID-19, and that's going to typically affect the lungs. Now in the lungs you have these air sacs called alveoli, and this is where gas exchange occurs. Inside those alveoli you have two types of pneumocytes or lung cells. Type 1 have to do with gas exchange, that oxygen carbon dioxide exchange, and then type 2 produce surfactant. Now surfactant decreases surface tension. This basically allows that air sac to stay open and not collapse. As the virus comes down, it's going to typically infect the type 2 pneumocytes. The reason for that is this S-spike protein on the outside of the virus. It can dock onto this ACE2 receptor, which allows it to gain access inside the cell. Now, once inside the cell, basically it's just hijacking your cell in order to replicate itself to make more copies. The way it does that is through ribosomes. Ribosomes will take the RNA that's inside this virus and translate that into proteins. From there, it'll use enzymes called proteinases to make components of the virus. The viral capsid, more of these spike proteins, and so on. Also, RNA polymerase, another enzyme, can make copies of this RNA. So now you have lots of copies of the RNA, a lot of components of the virus, put those together, and bam, you've got your virus. Now this virus isn't just going to sit in this pneumocyte. It's going to want to get out. When it does, it's going to damage this cell in the process. Now, as a response to that damage, this cell is going to release particular inflammatory mediators. That's going to draw white blood cells to the area, particularly macrophages. Macrophages will release these cytokines then, particularly interleukin-1, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha. One of the things that these cytokines will do are increasing dilation of the capillaries and the permeability of those capillaries. Basically, it's making the capillaries more leaky. Now, the fluid inside the capillaries will then start to leak into this alveolar space, increasing the pressure around that alveoli. Now, one of the problems here is, remember, this virus is damaging type 2 pneumocytes. Now, what do? They make surfactant. What does surfactant do? It helps to keep that air sac inflated and doesn't allow it to collapse under pressure. The problem is, as these get damaged, surfactant levels could go down, and you still have this pressure increasing from the permeability of the capillaries here. So as pressure goes up, surfactant concentration goes down in relation to that. Eventually, the pressure is going to exceed the capacity of the surfactant to keep that air sac inflated, and that's when that air sac will collapse. One of the other issues here too is these cytokines and inflammatory mediators will draw more white blood cells to the area, particularly neutrophils. Neutrophils will release these radical oxygen species, free radicals, and proteases, which are meant to damage the virus, but will also damage both type 1 and type 2 pneumocytes in the process. So now you've got damage to both types of pneumocytes here along the alveoli, which now are going to affect gas exchange and the ability to keep that alveoli air sac inflated. So what happens when you get damage to a lot of the cells here and pressure increasing? You're going to get a bunch of junk collecting inside the alveolar space, and that's what we call consolidation. So when people develop consolidation here, they'll start to have a cough. They're trying to get that junk up and out. Part of the process here too with these cytokines is they will travel to the brain, particularly the hypothalamus, and that will trigger the hypothalamus to try to turn the temperature up, produce prostaglandins, which will give that person a fever. So now we have a fever and we have a cough from consolidation. All of these are going to affect the ability to exchange gas, oxygen to carbon dioxide. which is going to typically result in hypoxemia, lower oxygen level in the blood, and then an increased work of breathing. So people are going to start breathing more rapidly to try to get air in. So these are pretty typical symptoms we see: fever, cough, heavy breathing. Eventually, if this doesn't improve, people can develop acute respiratory distress syndrome. These are people who are going to need ventilators because they can't exchange gas here very well. And because they can't, if we can't get them a ventilator, things will start to progress even more rapidly. This process will start to spill over to the rest of the body. And that's when we get this systemic inflammatory response syndrome, the SIRS. What happens there is this same kind of process occurs. So you're getting dilation and increased permeability of capillaries all over the place. And so imagine these capillaries increasing in permeability, fluid leaking outside those capillaries, and that's typically going to reduce blood volume systemically. So we'll see a lower blood pressure at that point. That's a bad sign. That's a bad sign because less fluid in circulating around in the circulatory system means less perfusion to organs. And so you'll see, particularly in the kidneys, BUN and creatinine levels start to go up because the kidneys are unable to process that. In the liver, again, with less perfusion there, you're going to start to see damage, and liver enzymes like AST and ALT start to increase on labs. Again, if this doesn't slow down and isn't affected, that could progress to organ failure, which obviously is not a good thing. So basically, that's kind of what happens with this whole process. I hope this was useful for you. I'd love to hear any comments if you have them. Share this if you feel like it's useful information. So stay tuned for the next couple of days. We're going to be looking at prevention tomorrow and then possible treatments the day after that. Stay well, everyone. Take care.